when we take society and we say, okay, you are going to use these credit cards because that's the way we've evolved.
And no doubt they're convenient.
Yeah.
But convenience has a fee, apparently.
It does. A very, very big fee. And everybody's obligated, right? If you want to be a modern... Today's topic is the congressional hearing on Visa and MasterCard having a duopoly in the United States on the credit card scene, which is super interesting. Obviously, the definition of duopoly, a monopoly, is when one company has a corner on the market. A duopoly is two. And it's interesting that they are saying that between Visa and MasterCard, 85% of all the transactions go through those two companies.
That's crazy.
When you consider the amount of commerce that's happening in the United States, it's a phenomenal amount of business.
Well, and let's talk about why that matters, right? Because if you have 85% of transactions going through these two companies, and each transaction is charging an average of 1 to 3% per transaction.
Yeah. That's huge, right? And not only that, like, it's interesting over time. I think if we like really roll it back, I mean, you know, there was a time where when you walked up to some place, it was like, hey, do you want to pay with cash? Do you want to pay with check? Or you could use a credit card. And in, you know, back in my days, they had actually this paper thing, and they would like run it across, and it would get the impression of the numbers, and then they would do it by hand, right?
You're kind of dating yourself there.
I know.
That's crazy.
But it's good because now it's interesting. You go to a lot of places and they're like, we don't take cash. We won't take a check. We only take debit card or credit card, right? So it's interesting that in society, they've actually kind of helped everybody get onto this thing where you're swiping a card for anything you need. A lot of people don't even carry cash anymore because that's the way you do it. It's either like Venmo or Zelle or credit card. And so 85% of all transactions are going through just those two companies. And they're getting a piece of the pie on every single transaction. You know, because if somebody uses Square, right, or anything else, like you're still swiping your Visa.
Right. There's
right?
still a transaction fee on that.
Right. And so between these two companies and the way that society has evolved, they've gotten themselves where they're getting a piece of the pie on 85% of almost everything that happens.
Well, and the other huge part of it is that the majority of people have to, because of this duopoly, have a MasterCard and have a Visa card. So when they go to a store and that store doesn't accept it because they don't want to pay the fees, they lose the business. Who carries cash nowadays?
Right.
No one. So it leaves business with this choice of, you know, pay the fees to Visa and MasterCard or don't pay them at all, but that's not really a choice anymore.
No.
Like you have to have that option to win that business.
Right. And so I think the credit card industry is actually something that a lot of people don't understand because it's always behind the scenes, and you think, oh, I swipe my card and at the end of the month I pay off my balance, hopefully, or something like that. But there's a lot going on behind there, right? So one of Congress's main concerns is they said, okay, look, if we've only got two companies and they're not really competing against each other, it's kind of wink, wink, nod, nod. They're both charging the same fees, so it's not real competition. There can't be like a written agreement that says, okay, I won't do this if you won't do this.
Right.
But it's kind of happening, right? And so Congress's concern is, hey, at the end of the day, what merchants are doing is they're raising the prices on their products to cover the fee, right? Or you even see it sometime where they say, hey, if you pay with a credit card, we're going to charge an additional 3% fee to cover this fee that we get hit with as the merchant. And so basically Congress is saying, hey, you guys have cornered the market, and now you've got 85% of the business of everything that's going on in the United States. And what it's doing is you're padding your pockets, and it's the end payer is the consumer, and they're paying 1 to 3% more on all of their goods and services because you've kind of transitioned.
Well, this isn't even just small merchants either, right? Because it's a percentage fee. It's not just like, oh, it's $10 or 30 cents per transaction or whatever it is. It's a percentage of the price. So this is for big businesses as much as it is small businesses.
For sure.
It's a kind of an industry or a worldwide impact. Mm-hmm. It's kind of crazy. So what are they doing about it? What are they proposing we do about it?
So one of the things that they're talking about, and probably the one to check out, and maybe we can get some clips on here, is Josh Hawley, and he's going after these guys, and he's basically saying, hey, you know what, you guys better figure this out, Visa and MasterCard, and some of the others, or basically Congress is going to come in, we're going to break you up, and we're going to take these two companies and break them up into several companies so that there's more competition. Their feeling is that, hey, you know what? Yeah, if somebody else comes in, you're at 1 to 3%. They come in at 0.75%. They start taking over the market. It's going to force prices down. Is their idea, right? And we have a history of doing that. I mean, especially in the Industrial Revolution, there was a lot of breaking up of like Standard Oil and some of the big Vanderbilt companies and things like that. And what they're basically wanting to do is they're even making proposals saying, hey, if there's a bank that's over, I think it's 100 billion in size,
100 billion or more,
you have to offer something in this area to kind of compete with these two. So it's kind of interesting because a lot of times what you'll see is when that happens into an industry, they break up some of these giants into smaller companies. They're still big. And then over time, this one buys out that one and this one buys out that one, and you start to kind of come back into where there's kind of major players there. But that's what they're telling them right now is, hey, you got to get this stuff figured out. The other interesting that Josh brought up in the congressional hearing, which is amazing, is he asked these companies straight up, what is your profit margin? Do you know the answer was?
I don't.
Over 50% for both of them. So he's like, wait a minute. He's like, that's unheard of. Like, I don't want to say unheard of, right? But most companies, when you have a profit margin, it's not 50%. Most of the time, 20, 25, 10, something.
50 is killing it.
They're killing it.
Yeah.
So basically, he's like, you guys got a corner on the market, 85% of everything, and you have this huge profit margin. And one of the people that was testifying in front of Congress was like, well, we can't afford to compete. We don't have enough wiggle room. And so he was like, how can you not have enough wiggle room when you've got 50% profit margin on that much? Like it's a little bit crazy. So I think that kind of the concerning part of it is they're saying, hey, like, it's concerning that there's just the two of you doing this and your fees are so similar to each other. But it's also concerning us that you have this big fat profit margin and you're telling us that you can't compete with anybody else. Like,
yeah, it raises some ears because why they're saying they can't do anything, and then when they look at what's been done in the past to try and fix this, I think in like 2010 they tried to cap the fees that they could charge for debit transactions.
Yeah.
Well, and they pointed at that and said, well, that didn't save any costs for the consumer and X, Y, and Z, but did it or did it not? Is that just what they're saying to hide behind this 50% profit margin?
Obviously, they're doing well, so I don't think it hurt them. I think that, and that's pretty clear, right? And the only thing they're doing is, hey, don't get too crazy with this. The other part that most people don't realize is that, so Visa and MasterCard, this is one piece of it, right? I did some consulting for a company who was just getting their tails handed to them because they were an online company. They were forced that you have to use credit cards, right? Or else you're not even going to be in the business. And so they couldn't figure out why they were losing so much money. We went in and started dissecting their merchant accounts. And what was amazing is Visa and MasterCard had their 1 to 3% fee. American Express had theirs. I think they accepted American Express. But in addition to that, the banks that received the deposits, they had
a
processing fee, and there was middlemen in the websites. So when you have a website, you had to have somebody that basically processes the Visa transactions. And when we got in there, there was four people, each of them taking a piece of the pie, and they were losing close to 10%.
I was going to say, each of them at 2.5%.
Yeah. So they were losing 10%, which is a big deal when you
especially
consider
on mobile profit margins.
Right. And so the company was getting their butts handed to them because they're like, we're losing 10%, but we can't do it without credit cards because everybody's on credit cards now. But everybody had their fee. And so what our job was doing the consulting on it was we went through and said, okay, let's eliminate some of these middlemen. Is there somebody that we can consolidate down and get these processes through? It's expensive. And again, when we take society and we say, okay, you are going to use these credit cards because that's the way we've evolved.
And no doubt they're convenient.
Yeah.
But convenience has a fee, apparently.
It does. A very, very big fee. And everybody's obligated, right? If you want to be a modern person and, again, you're going to use credit cards. So that's the one thing. The other fascinating thing, I think, from a financial advisory standpoint is it is extremely convenient to swipe your card and all that kind of stuff. But the question becomes, do they have an alternative motive here, right? And the question is okay, well, if it just becomes easy to swipe it and people are not as disciplined as they should be, then all of a sudden these credit card companies, they get their transaction fees, but whoever is holding the, if you're carrying a balance, right? Whoever's holding the note, so to speak.
Yeah.
Now, Visa and MasterCard claim, and when they were testifying before Congress, they're like, well, we don't hold that, right? The banks do. But the average interest rate on a credit card right now is like north of 20%.
Yeah, it's outrageous.
Right? So it's almost like we get everybody addicted to where they have to use their credit card. And then the people who are disciplined start carrying a balance, and the balance gets bigger. And 20, some of them as high as 30% interest rates are killing Americans. And they pulled it up, and there's I think there's close to $1 trillion in credit card debt in the United States right now. $1 trillion at 20 to 30% interest. And the banks, the big banks, are the ones that are holding those notes. So it's almost like you kind of groom people, you get them used to like using the plastic, right?
You make the user experience so simple. I mean, now you just tap. You don't even have to swipe.
You don't have to
just
insert the
like
chip.
gesture at the machine, and it takes $100 or whatever.
Yeah, which is a little bit disconcerting, right? But they make it so easy, and then you get some people might get themselves in debt, and they don't realize how hard 20 to 30% is to catch up on it, and the next thing it's this vicious cycle, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's what they're saying is like, hey, like it almost seems like big banks and Visa and MasterCard are kind of in cahoots, and they're kind of luring Americans into this thing. And then, on top of that, right, like I think most people don't understand, because you get benefits for using credit card, right? So my credit card they use for almost everything, because of the benefits is I get Delta Sky Miles for everything I purchase through American Express. Well, we pay off our credit card at the end of every month so that there's no charges.
There's no balance, there's no interest fees.
Right. But you have to ask yourself, okay, well, who's paying for all these miles that I get? Because we usually take a trip every year on our miles. And it's like, well, that doesn't come for free, right?
Someone's paying for
Somebody's
it.
paying for it. It's probably us.
I was going to say.
Visa and MasterCard, although they're really good people, are probably not just sending me to
kidding?
Dubai.
You don't think large corporations want to just send you and the fam on a trip?
Maybe. I would like to say to myself, I'm winning the game here. Like it's a game, right? And I'm winning because I'm paying it off every month, and maybe other people aren't. But the reality is, at the end of the day, I'm positive that they're making a ton more off of me than what they're giving me. It's just the idea is that, well, I'd like to get some of it back.
Well, and what they've done, I'm sure, is through years of research and development and testing and user experience, they've made it feel like a game. I spend real money, but I get points back, and then, I get to cash those points in for a prize. It's like you go to the arcade, you swipe your card, you play a game, you play life, and then you take it up to the counter and say, tickets to Tahiti, I'm in. The arcade's definitely making money off you.
Oh, all day long, right? In fact, in my long time ago, I used to work for a bank, and the bank had a credit card division, and we were in the financial advisory side, and I cannot remember how in the world we got brought into this, but they were having a conversation that the rewards program that the bank had for using their credit card was beginning to be spendy. They were spending a lot of money, right? And what it was is, for every dollar that you spent on your credit card through the bank, you would get, a dollar in points, basically. And I was dumbfounded by this, I guess because I'd never been on the behind the curtain, so to speak. But I was brought into this meeting, and they were saying, hey, we want to increase the profit margin of the bank, but this rewards program that has lured all these people in to use our credit cards is becoming to be expensive. And so what they did is they just said, okay, well, we'll just change the ratio of how many points they get for every dollar they spend, and they cut it in half. And so, but most people really didn't notice it.
Yeah.
Right? They're just like, oh, I thought that I had more points than that or whatever. But even the Delta American Express relationship, they did that to us. Where,
recently.
Yeah, they just said, hey, you don't get a mile for every dollar you spend anymore. And they changed the ratio, and again, so it's like, well, they're carrying a 50% profit margin, but they can do that. They can arbitrarily just change the agreement that I had with American Express and Delta. They're like, oh, you know what? They decided.
Yeah, and because it's a game, so to speak, it's just arbitrary points. There's no real value attached to them.
Yeah.
They can do whatever they want.
Yeah.
And it's all just to make you feel like using this card is a great experience, when in reality they're hitting the merchant with a fee, they're charging you an annual fee, and they have a 50% profit margin, so they're making it out like a bandit while they have a partnership with Delta and give you discounted tickets.
Yeah. And then somewhere in that whole mix, there's a big bank that's making 20 or 30%.
On people carrying a balance.
Yeah. It's crazy, right? And so then you say, okay, well, let's be rebellious and let's rebel against the system that has been created that we've all been lured into. Well, the answer is cash, and a lot of people won't take it anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, that's crazy, but, and where, I can't remember what the percentage was. They said this the other day. I should look it up. Maybe you could look it up real quick. What the percentage of goods in the United States is sold through Amazon. Just one company. But again, if you're gonna go through Amazon or eBay or any of the big retailers online, it's gonna go through a credit card because you can't use cash. You can't go to Amazon and like, I'm gonna pay cash for something, right? I don't know if it says it on it, but it was a huge number. I think it was something, and the other one that was really interesting was
2023 U.S. based sellers sold more than 4.5 billion items.
And I think it was, I'll get this wrong, maybe it was over 50% of Americans are Amazon Prime members.
Yeah.
That gives you an idea of how much commerce is going through that one company. And again, you're going to use Amazon, it's going to go through a credit card. You're going to go through eBay, it's going to go through a credit card or a debit card. Like, it's just amazing how we've all been lured into this thing to where even if you want to use cash, it's becoming kind of hard. Which the conspiracy theorists in the world, they're trying to say, hey, they're bringing us into this system so that they can go to digital currency. Because this really is kind of one click off of digital currency.
Yeah. I mean,
right?
We have money in bank accounts and investment accounts, and those are just numbers. Like, there's no room with $100,000 sitting in dollar bills with our name on it. No, It's just a value assigned to our number somewhere.
Right. And so there's this digital thing that's happening, and there's an accounting happening. You spent this much, here's what your balance is, and you transfer from your bank account to pay it off electronically, right? But it's really interesting. In fact, some time ago, my sister, actually, it's kind of a funny story. My sister had some jet skis. I decided to buy the jet skis from her, and we agreed upon a price. It was $10,000. And my sister and I have always had this relationship where we drove back and forth, right? So she said, hey, I'll bring the jet skis down. I said, great, I'll have a check waiting for you. And she jabs me and she says, well, is it going to clear, right? And I was like, yes, it'll be fine. But I decided to play a joke on her. And so I got an old briefcase and I went to my bank and I said, I want $10,000 in ones. And they're like, we can't do that. We don't have it. And I was like, well, how long would it take to get it? And they're like, you have to order it and it'll take us like a week to get that. And it's kind of crazy to me because I'm like, okay, like, probably not everybody's coming in asking for $10,000 in ones. I get that. But you're telling me you don't have $10,000 in the bank, like in ones? Like, you kind of think that they would, right? And they're like, no, like, we don't. And it would take us like this long to actually bring it in.
To source them and
all that kind of stuff. So unfortunately, I didn't have enough advanced planning to where I could pull the joke off on my sister, which I really wanted to do. But it kind of shocks you a little bit. And you're like, oh, really? Like, how much cash do you actually have on hand, considering the electronic numbers that what your deposits are showing, right? But how much do they have on hand is actually really small.
Yeah, it's a small percentage compared to total deposits and withdrawals. Like, I don't have a number in mind, but like, it's small.
Yeah. So, I think it's a fascinating thing. I'm normally a small government kind of guy. I don't like government interfering. But in this case, like, I after having done the consulting for this company, I'm learning more about how much is actually being taken up by not only these guys, but the middlemen and the banks, how the banks have lured us into this. I'm for it. I think they should break them up. I think they should bust them up and make it more competitive. And at the end of the day, the conspiracy theorists would say, well, you can break it up into 8 people, but if as long as it's the same people pulling the strings, like, maybe. But the reality is that if you did start a new credit card, and let's just say you called it, maybe it's an Elon Musk company, right? He calls it the X, right? Yeah. Everything's got to be an X.
The C or whatever.
Yeah, something, right? If it's not something that's recognized, if it's not Visa, MasterCard, or American Express, and you go and say, hey, will you guys take my credit card?
Yeah, maybe Discover.
Yeah, maybe Discover. I guess I forgot about them. But who's going to take that credit card?
Yeah.
They're not, because these guys have such a stronghold. So I guess maybe I'm getting old, or maybe I'm slipping, but
probably both.
Yeah, I'm going to go for that. But you know what? I do. I think it's dangerous for two companies to handle 85% of the transactions, and you can't get away from it because you can't use cash, hardly anymore, not very much anymore. So I don't know. It's kind of interesting. I think it's important for people to kind of keep up to speed on this stuff. There's a lot of great video footage coming out of these congressional hearings. With a couple of kind of the famous senators and congressmen kind of getting their piece in. But people should look into this and understand like how this thing works, how much of a corner on the market it is, and they should contact their congressman and be like, hey, you know what? Like, we do think you should bust them up. Or
Yeah,
maybe you shouldn't.
this is an issue that is directly tied to people. Like, this is an issue that you have in your pocket right now.
Yeah.
It's not. There are a lot of things, I'll admit, that go through Congress and legislation, and it's fairly nebulous.
Maybe you don't care about the giant jumping brown snake that is in Florida. They're trying to preserve its life because you live in Utah, but
Right.
everybody has a Visa or MasterCard, and you have to, right? You have to use them. So I agree with you. I think it affects everybody. So it'd be interesting to see how it comes out. And the other interesting thing, though, and I'm always fascinated by this. One of the things that was interesting is it was Senator Kennedy was talking, and I think it was, I can't remember if it was Visa or MasterCard. The CEO couldn't make it. They subpoenaed him and asked him to come in, and he couldn't make it, so he sent his assistant. And I think Kennedy was like, hey, is this not important? Like, and he asked the guy, he goes, what was more important than us? Why can't your boss show up? And he's like, I don't know, I couldn't make it. But it kind of says, hey, if you think you're too big that even Congress can't bring you in, I don't know if maybe it's Hunter Biden that is the head of the company. I'm not sure, but it basically takes some huevos to tell Congress, you know what, like
This isn't important. It's not worth my time.
it's not worth my time. I'll send my assistant to answer your questions. Like, that's pretty brazen, and it also kind of drives me a little bit to say, hey, you know what, if you're that arrogant, maybe we do need to bust you out.
Yeah. What is going on?
But it's kind of interesting. Another interesting thing that people should look up is how much money Nancy Pelosi made on visas after the congressional stuff that went through.
Just look it up right now.
Yeah, Nancy Pelosi insider trading. I think it was Visa, and look it up. And that is another fascinating trade that Nancy Pelosi made.
So her husband, not her.
Oh yeah, of course, it wasn't her. She doesn't do that
right.
kind of stuff.
Gee,
Sorry.
she would never.
No.
Dumped 2,000 shares of Visa in July, just prior to them getting sued by the DOJ.
Ooh.
The trade was worth at least $500,000.
And it's amazing because her husband, apparently not her, but her husband, allegedly, we don't know, has outtraded every Wall Street hedge fund. They've made tens of millions of dollars on just knowing right when to sell these stocks and right when to buy them, specifically before legislation happens on them. But apparently, Nancy Pelosi and Visa are pretty tight. That's, well, I read that on their bathroom
Allegedly.
stall. Yeah, I don't know if it's true.
I've heard that if you just say allegedly,
Then then you can't get in trouble.
Right, allegedly.
Yeah, allegedly. There's a lot of people in Congress that are in bed with these guys, which is interesting, right? Because not only do they happen to know when things are happening to Visa and MasterCard, but they're also the ones that are helping them get deals passed. Allegedly. So anyway, allegedly people should contact your representative. Look into this stuff. It's amazing what you find when you get educated on it and how much it's actually costing you.
Especially on an issue that's personal.
Yeah.
This has direct impact on you, so do some research and contact your representatives.
Absolutely.
Sweet.
All right.